This week's big idea is introduced by a very famous painting that we see here. And we can probably recognise straight away that we're in France. This is the French tricolor, the three-coloured flag that symbolised the French Revolution of 1789. Here's Notre Dame Cathedral and some very typically Parisian buildings, apartment blocks, so we know we're in Paris. What's going on in the picture is clearly some kind of battle, and there's a great many people in the background here. We can see their bayonets and their guns at the back. And as we get closer to the front of the picture, and there's a lot of movement in the picture, movement forward, which is important, we can make out these people a little bit more and we can see who they are. So the main figure is this woman, and this woman is Liberty. She is a figurative representation of freedom for the French. In one hand, her symbol of the revolution, in the other, her rifle with its bayonet, the violence necessary to achieve freedom. And she wears the cap of the revolutionary men and women of 1789. With her are all sorts of people. She brings everybody with her. She's almost like a goddess, half-clothed from ancient Rome, and she has this heavenly light behind her and shining on her face. So she's bringing all sorts of people. We've got two children here right at the front of the battle, and people of different social classes and different ethnic backgrounds, as we can see by their dress. And we've got soldiers and civilians all moving forward together. And there have to be sacrifices. There are dead soldiers at the front, and this dead civilian has even had his trousers robbed from him. So here are the sacrifices that have to be made, perhaps, for the freedom represented by the woman in the centre of the painting. Now, we can see from this painting, and particularly perhaps the type of weapons and the type of clothing they're wearing, that we've actually moved out of our early modern period in the painting. This is painted in 1830, and our early modern period, we've said, finishes in 1750. The reason for that is that our big idea of classical liberalism this week is an idea that was formulated gradually during the early modern period and really came into fruition at the end of the 18th century, first in the French Revolution of 1789, then in the subsequent French revolutions and other revolutions in Europe in the early part of the 19th century, and particularly perhaps in the American War for Independence and the foundation of the United States of America. So this famous painting, Liberty Leading the People, represents our big idea that classical liberalism is about the people moving forward together and claiming their freedoms. So some of the big ideas we've learnt about in the early modern period are about changes in the way people thought about themselves and society, from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment, and now the idea of liberalism that moves the world forward from the early modern period into our modern world through the Industrial Revolution and on to the 20th century. And classical liberalism is a political idea that forms the foundation of Western democracy. Let's learn a little bit more about what that means. Classical liberalism, as represented in the icon here, includes key ideas and freedoms like the freedom to protest and the freedom of speech. And it's classical because it's a type of liberalism that has a pedigree. It's not from the ancient classical world, classical Greece and Rome, but classical liberalism is the original form of liberal ideas, and there are newer ones. And liberal means freedom. Liberal is about liberty and freedom and breaking free from oppression, people being able to express themselves. Let's try and understand the big idea by reading the article. Classical liberals give priority to individual freedom in social, political, and economic life. Here's the big idea. You, the individual, should be able to do what you want without restrictions. They recognise that different people's freedoms may conflict and disagree on where the limits to freedom lie, but broadly agree that individual freedom should be maximised and the use of force should be minimised. You should be able to do what you like, but other people should too. So we need to respect each other, and the government shouldn't use force to make us keep rules or behave in certain ways. Okay, that's the big idea. Let's read on. They, classical liberals, they see the individual as more important than the collective and call for limited representative government that draws its right to rule from the people. We should elect governments to represent our interests, and those governments should be limited in what they can do to us. They, classical liberals, they believe that individuals should be free to make choices about how they live their lives, so long as those choices do not cause harm to others. Classical liberals disagree about the exact role of the state, but generally wish to limit the use of force, whether by individuals or governments. They call for states that are small and kept in bounds by known rules. They favour minimal government, with the majority of decisions being left to the discretion of the individual. Free speech and mutual toleration are viewed as essential foundations for peaceful cooperation between free people. If we're going to live together properly, we have to respect each other. We have to allow for the fact that other people disagree. We have to let them disagree with us. Classical liberals argue that such cooperation gives rise to social benefits such as markets, customs, culture, and language. By markets, we're talking about economics here. In economics, classical liberals believe that prosperity, wealth, is not created by governments, but by the mutual cooperation of free individuals inventing, creating, saving, investing, and ultimately exchanging goods and services voluntarily, a free market economy. We've learnt about that already. Classical liberalism derives largely from the ideas of thinkers such as John Locke, Adam Smith, and the founding fathers of the United States, people like Washington and Jefferson. Classical liberalism is not a fixed set of views, but a spectrum of views on social, economic, and political issues grounded in a belief in freedom and an aversion to the coercion of one individual by another. What that means, an aversion is they don't like it, and the coercion is making people do things. So liberals don't like anybody to force anybody to think, behave in a certain way. Classical liberalism, has enjoyed a revival in recent decades, but now faces new and urgent questions, such as should the freedom to express oneself freely be extended to groups who wish to destroy freedom? So, for example, should terrorists be able to publish hate speech? Should they have that freedom or not? So our big idea was classical liberalism, and it's about the people, individuals, moving forward, claiming their freedom and their ability to decide things for themselves, and the government helping them to do that rather than stopping them to do that. Make sure you complete the frog quiz and the comprehension questions in your booklet. Our big question is about free speech. Should a society allow absolute freedom of speech? Is there anything you should not be allowed to say? Use the hints in your booklet to help you write your essay. Think about what should be restricted and why restricting things can be good and why it can be bad.